In this video, I'm going to be drawing these holiday pine cones, and I'm going to be using the Derwent Inktense pencils, blocks, and the Derwent Lightfast colored pencils on the Lightfast paper. Throughout this video, I'm going to be reviewing these products, talking about what I like and how I enjoy using them together, and I'm also going to be sharing with you a ton of mixed media tips. The very first thing that I did was to soak my Lightfast paper in some water and stretch it on my paper. And you can see on the far left some of the staples. This process isn't something that I'm showing in this video, but it is part of my process when I use water-based materials so that I am not going to deal with warping or buckling paper. Now, the video is at real time here, and I wanted to show you how loose and rough you can be with these Inktense pencils. The Inktense pencils are all going to blend out when I add water, and that is what I'm planning to do later. So I'm using little circles, I'm blending lots of colors, I'm moving around pretty quickly, quickly for me anyway. I mean, you could actually go a lot faster than this, but this is a looser, quicker, more spontaneous part of the process for me. You could swatch these colors on a scratch piece of paper and add some water, and every once in a while I do that. But it's important to know that your colors are going to change. When you add water, these colors are going to look different. And if you are going to be nervous about adding the water and not knowing exactly what your colors are going to do beforehand, be sure to swatch those on a separate sheet of paper. So I'm actually going through and working on the berries for this composition first. And I'm doing that for a very specific reason. When you add water to this media, it is going to turn into kind of an inky paint. It's going to be permanent, and anything that your water touches is going to be activated. If I activate these berries and the background at the same time, those can blend into each other. And I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. This is a clip from a previous YouTube video, and I did the entire piece with the Inktense pencils on sanded paper, and then I added water. And right here where I'm adding water to the red flower, the blue is wet and it's bleeding into the flower. After experiencing that bleed, I decided to dry the blue background with a hairdryer before adding water to the rest of the piece. And what I found was that that blue had been completely sealed and was no longer activated and blending with the red. So because I don't have any other color in the background, if my water bleeds out of these shapes a little bit, it's not going to activate the background. And once this layer is completely dry, it is not going to reactivate either. So handling pieces separately will reduce the bleeding and the blending and is a great solution if you want cleaner, crisper lines. When I add water, I'm just dipping a brush into water or using a dispensing water brush. When I shift from a darker berry to a lighter berry, I am cleaning out my brush in between on just a piece of paper towel right next to my work area. As I continue to build up this base layer, I'm going to talk about a couple things that I just love about these pencils. So one of the things that is just my favorite about Inktense pencils is that I have the control of a drawing media, but I have the flexibility and the looseness of a wet media. I can add water, get really cool effects, and then because these are Inktense pencils, that effect is permanent. Once it's dry, it stays on the paper. It doesn't move around or activate again, which is a much more familiar experience to me than working with traditional watercolor or watercolor pencils. If you didn't know already, watercolor can reactivate when you add water on top of it. So if you lay on a base layer, it dries, you add a glaze of another color on top, those colors that you had before, they can change, they can move around a little bit. And if you are a colored pencil artist, you probably like things to stay where they are. And so this is a really nice transitional medium for you. So you have the familiarity of colored pencil, but you can play around with some new techniques and some new marks. If you have heard other artists talk about the Inktense pencils, you probably have heard them mention that Inktense pencils may not be as light fast as a traditional high quality colored pencil. And there are elements of that that are true, but there are also elements of that that don't matter a whole lot. If you're laying in a base layer, you do want that base layer to be permanent, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the very highest light fast ratings possible because you're going to cover it with another layer. The other thing to keep in mind is that just because some of the Inktense pencils are not super light fast doesn't mean that you have to use them. I actually went through my entire tin of colored pencils and I wrote the light fast rating on the back of the pencil. So that little piece of the pencil that has the color portion on it, I wrote the light fast rating on there, and actually the majority of the pencils are in what I would consider an appropriate light fast range. And this whole piece was done with pencils that were rated a 6 or above, with 8 being the highest light fast rating. So I feel pretty confident telling you that you can be very careful with the colors that you choose and have a light fast painting or a light fast underpainting in your work. When you add water, if you stay within a color or a color family, you can blend the colors together a little bit, and you can also try to keep them separate depending on the effect that you're going for. So when I go into these darker areas, I'm not dragging it through the light green, but in the green areas that I wanted to blend, I would drag the water back and forth between the different color greens more. Here in the pine cone, I am trying to keep the shadow areas separate from the areas that the light is hitting. And that is helping to keep the structure of my shadow shapes in the pine cone. If I just hit the whole thing with water and I wasn't paying attention to where the water was going, I would very likely lose the structure of my shapes and forms. I really love using the Inktense pencils for the control, but there are also Inktense blocks, which to my understanding are the exact same material, but you can draw with them as a block on your paper, or you can mix them up into paint. And that's what I did for this section. I went into my blocks and I mixed up a paint with the block, and then I painted in that blue part at the bottom. I also mixed up a little pile of paint, and then I sprinkled it or splattered it in the background to kind of add some variety and interest into that top right corner. To make the paint, all you need to do is dip your paintbrush in water and then rub it all over the block, and then kind of put it into a part of a palette or something. This could be a plastic plate, it could be a watercolor palette, some kind of slippery surface that will hold the paint, and mixing up little pools of paint. If you mix up enough, you can dip your paintbrush in and splatter it all over the surface, or you could paint in a larger area like what I'm doing now. I'm blending out that splatter that I didn't love, and then I am mixing in some more paint and kind of feathering it out to blend into that white. I am adding more water when I want the paint to be more transparent, and then when I've got it the way I want, I hit it with a hair dryer. That helps the dry time speed up a little bit, but it also helps tighten the paper back to its original form and helps pull out any of those warps or stretches or buckling. That only works though if your paper is actually pre-stretched. If you're enjoying this video, I would love it if you hit the thumbs up button. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss any of my future videos, be sure to turn on notifications as well. After that single layer of Inktense was dry, I decided to come in with the Lightfast colored pencils next. My goal on this part of the drawing is to increase the opacity, refine the details, and put those finishing touches on. And I'm actually just doing one pass of each. One pass of the Inktense pencils to begin with, that established the colors, the structure, the composition, and then one pass with the Lightfast colored pencils. If I was doing a piece just with colored pencils, I probably would layer it, and I would do a layer with colored pencils, maybe blend out with mineral spirits, a layer, blend out. But this Inktense layer establishes the color, establishes the values and the composition relatively quickly, and it fills in the tooth of the paper. So I don't have to go back and forth with the mineral spirits, and I'm able to just lay down the colored pencils. As I'm coming into this particular area, I'm refining the details of this piece of the wreath. I'm looking at those little pine needles and the structure of them. And these Lightfast pencils keep a really sharp point, so they're great for the fine details in the edge work. If you are working on teeny tiny details in your piece, working with a semi-permanent medium is pretty important. Colored pencils aren't going to move around if you smudge your paper, if you add water, even if you add mineral spirits, they're not moving around a whole lot. So spending a lot of time with little details is worth the investment. Whereas if I put this much detail into the Inktense stage of my work, once I add water, a lot of that detail is disappearing. Here I'm coming in with my highlights and my lighter details, and I'm using the white Lightfast colored pencil. And I was not originally a huge fan of this Lightfast colored pencil when I was using other papers, but once I got the Lightfast paper, this pencil worked really well. I have no idea why it is that this pencil works so great on this paper and not so great on other papers like the hot press watercolor paper or Stonehenge paper, but I do show that process and discuss it in my how to pick colored pencil paper video, which I will link here and in the notes below. On this particular paper, I'm able to lay down the white very opaquely. I'm also able to lay down my other colors that I'm using with medium to heavy pressure, and I'm really able to get a permanent rich mark from these colored pencils. If you wanted a bit more of a delicate mark, which is something that I go for in my other colored pencil pieces, I would probably layer a little bit more slowly, but because I'm keeping the pine needles a little looser because I don't want to draw every single teeny tiny little pine needle, I am putting a little bit more pressure and I'm able to build up that rich opacity faster. That being said, if you did want to add a layer of colored pencils and then blend with mineral spirits, you could do that on this surface because your Inktense, after they've been activated with water, are permanent. So the addition of that mineral spirit to dilute and blend your colored pencils isn't going to affect the underlayer. And that might not necessarily be true with other materials. At this stage in the pine cone, I really want to draw the attention to all of the different colors that are in the shadows. And that's one of the things that I really love about these pencils as well. There are such a great variety of really rich, vibrant colors that are both dark values and light values. So I'm able to get a really dark, rich violet to go into these shadows to really just pump up and add a little extra kick to my pine cone. And of course, as the name suggests, all of the colors in this line of colored pencils are Lightfast. Here I'm actually using a colored pencil that is not a Lightfast pencil. It's the Derwent drawing pencil, and it is a more opaque white, and it's a softer, waxier colored pencil. So I will sometimes pull that out if I want a softer blend. I didn't use it on these pine needles though because I wanted a sharper, crisper look. So I switched back over to the Lightfast colored pencil. And I am picking my white based on what I'm working on. Here I am just reinforcing the shape of this particular strand of pine needles. And I am making sure that I know where I want everything to be. I love with that underpainting that establishes the form, but it allows me to still work in with my lights and my darks. You're able to retain the tooth of the paper with the Inktense blocks and pencil underpainting. So you can lay colored pencils directly on top of that underpainting, and you can go both directions. You can add the light values and the dark values. So when you are working with mixed media, it's important that you pay attention to the order in which you're using the mediums that you've selected. So for me, I had the water-based media. I used that first because I wanted to use it to stain my paper. I knew that it would retain the tooth of the paper and that I could then bring my colored pencils over the top for those rich, opaque details. If I had done the colored pencils first, any colored pencils, whether they be polychromos colored pencils, luminance pencils, or the Lightfast pencils, all of those colored pencils are a little bit waxy, and that wax in the colored pencil is going to repel any water media. So if you're working mixed media, you need to make sure that your waxier or oilier mediums are the last ones that you use. The order of your colors can be kind of important as well. Here I am applying a white Derwent drawing pencil. I'm establishing those key highlights and I am sculpting out the shape of my light shapes. Then I come in with a yellow or a different color and I can use that to blend out the white and to glaze over the top of the white. if I build up a lot of colored pencil, maybe darker value colored pencils first, and I try to add the white, it's going to be a lot harder. So with colored pencils, when it comes just to color and value, you want the lighter shapes done first. That being said, you can use a soft waxy colored pencil like this one to blend and to lighten areas that have already been blocked in, even if they do have a darker value. As I mentioned, my goal for this piece was to use the Lightfast colored pencils to refine the details and to just finish and polish off the drawing. So once I was able to take a full pass with the pencils from top to bottom, I took a step back and I looked at it as a whole, and I realized that I wanted that bottom left corner to be a little bit darker to help anchor that portion of the wreath and to give it a little bit more weight and depth. So I went back to my Inktense blocks. I mixed up a little pool of paint with a couple different blues, and then I put a little pile of that on the side of a palette. And I used this larger paintbrush to come in and to darken up those values. Now, because that waxy colored pencil layer is going to repel the water media, I don't have to be super careful about the edges, which is a really nice feature. So if I have any runs or spills when I'm working with the Inktense blocks and pencils over the top of a colored pencil layer, I don't need to stress out about that part being ruined. I can just grab a piece of paper towel and wipe off anything that's spilled onto the colored pencil layer. And because of that waxy layer, it's going to repel the water and it's going to protect the piece. So here I had a drip, just wiped it off with the paper towel. There may be a little tiny stain, but it's not going to be anything that is going to be dramatic or overwhelming. And if you do have a little stain, or if you do end up with a drip somewhere that you don't want to, you can play around with working this into your piece by maybe adding some more drips or adding a couple other spontaneous moments somewhere else. Working with mixed media is a really fun thing for me because it allows me to play around with a medium light colored pencil that I'm more comfortable with, but to push it into new directions to get some different effects. And this was a really fun piece that felt a little bit more playful and a little bit looser than what I'm used to doing. I was also able to do it a lot faster. And that's another really exciting thing about mixed media, that it can potentially speed up or just add some more life to your process.